Hi, I'm Susan Handley and I write the DC Cat Mackenzie mystery series. At the moment there are 3 books in the series. There's A Confusion of Crows, Feather and Claw, and the latest, The Body Politic. Cat Mackenzie is a rookie detective, and in A Confusion of Crows she's facing her very first murder investigation. She's paired with DI Alex York, who was actually a friend of her brother's. Her brother's now dead. Pete was a detective himself and was killed in a hit and run accident, which formed the catalyst for a whole change in Kat's life. Before that, she'd been studying marine biology, a PhD in marine biology in the Maldives. But when her brother died, she found herself asking herself an awful lot of questions about what it was she was achieving with her life, and made a complete lifestyle change and joined the police herself. So in A Confusion of Crows, the case looks as though it's going to be quite a straightforward one. But then things change when they discover a second body and discover actually nothing is quite what they first seemed. Kat is something of a Pollyanna character. Unlike quite a lot of detectives who have been around the block a few times and have got a little jaded, she's the eternal optimist and the terrier. So she doesn't let things go and won't push things to one side. And as a result, they actually do find out what happened, but not at great cost to Kat, both personally and professionally. So she ends up at the end of A Confusion of Crows exhausted, but convinced that she's made the right decision in her career choice. Then comes the second book. The second one, which is Feather and Claw, is set in Cyprus. Kat's actually there on holiday with a friend, taking a break, recovering from the first murder investigation. And she comes across, there's a death of a guest, and the guest seems to have died in somewhat unusual circumstances, but none of the family appeared to be overly concerned. And perhaps if Kat was having more of a good time on holiday, which she isn't, she might have let things lie, but she doesn't, and she starts digging. And she can't help but keep digging, despite the fact that it's at great personal risk to herself. Needless to say, she starts to discover things that she wasn't intended to discover, and soon things escalate, but not before she starts to actually find out the truth. This book was prompted by the idea that when you're on holiday, people can put on a different persona and they can appear to be something really quite different to what they are in real life. And how would somebody like Kat, who's a very perceptive sort of person, be able to see through that persona, particularly if something very serious depended upon it? And it was interesting to try and take Kat out of the environment of a police force where she was surrounded by procedure and protocols and people who knew what they were doing much more than she did, and have her relying on her own skills and her own internal resources to try and get to the bottom of what was going on. And she does, to great effect. Not that there aren't casualties along the way, but all the same, she comes out of it thinking that actually she doesn't need all of the props that she thought she did when she was first working her first murder case. So when she returns from holiday and faces a murder investigation a few months later, which is what's in The Body Politic, she is much more prepared to take more risks and go out on a limb, backing her own hunches more. And it's a good job she does, because actually a little bit of a rift starts to appear between her and DI Alex York, who up until then have been very close, probably too close, some people might say. So it's interesting to see how she starts to stand on her own 2 feet and how Alex and the others in the team respond. It's also made more pertinent to her in that a member of her own family is believed to be involved, certainly on the peripheral part of the investigation. So that adds an extra challenge to her, as she starts to come to terms with the fact that perhaps everything wasn't as it seemed and isn't what it seems with everybody that's around her. And it's based on the sort of premise that everybody has secrets, only some people's secrets are deeper and darker than others. Needless to say, she comes out of it having learnt some valuable lessons, not just lessons in terms of the job, but life lessons, and is quite a different person at the end of it. Not a different person in herself, but actually she's learning to trust herself more and go with her own instincts a lot more, which I think will stand her in very good stead for book 4. So I'm going to do a short reading now from A Confusion of Crows. It's broadly halfway through the book when she's trying to investigate a second murder that has thrown everything up in the air and has made them question everything they thought they knew already. So, a feeling of cold dread stole through Kat as she made the journey back to the station. She thought of the copy of the PM report for Megan still unread on her desk, and guilt churned her stomach like a wave, sending the breath crashing right out of her chest. She knew she wasn't entirely to blame. Bob should have picked up the difference between the two cases as well. After all, he'd read both post-mortem reports, but knowing that didn't appease her conscience any. Alex called again 15 minutes later. "Change of plan," he said. "Get yourself over to Craig Daniels. See if he's got any idea when this missing ex-boyfriend of Megan's could be." She could tell from the strained pitch that he was angry, but it was also clear who he was angry with, and it wasn't her. Bob clearly hadn't located the missing man. Standing outside Craig Daniels' home, Kat put on a warm smile and waited. He opened the door looking gaunt and tired and physically blanched at the sight of her. Kat felt the smile dissolve on her lips. "I'm sorry to bother you again, Mr. Daniels. I wonder if I could come in. I have more questions, I'm afraid." Craig Daniels nodded and walked back into the house, leaving the door open for her to follow. If he was interested in the reason for her visit, he didn't show it. Even once Kat was inside the house, sitting on an oversized three-seater at his invitation, he remained distant and remote. "Have you ever lost anyone close?" he asked. No, I haven't," she lied. Unsettled by the question, she moved on to the edge of her seat. She reminded herself that she needed to focus on the reason for her visit. But before she could speak, he started to talk. "There's no let-up, you know. No escaping the memories. Everything you see, hear, touch or smell, it all makes you hunger for what you've lost." For a moment, Kat thought he might cry, but then he appeared to compose himself. "But the hardest thing," he said with an obvious wobble to his voice, "is that even though remembering hurts so much, you so desperately don't want to forget. All you really want to do is wrap yourself up in memories, terrified that if you don't, they'll just disappear and be gone forever." He fell quiet for a moment, and Kat saw a depth of sadness in him she'd rarely seen before. He wasn't falling to pieces in the conventional way. He didn't appear to be struggling to look after himself. His hair was combed, his face freshly shaved, and his clothes neatly ironed. But he seemed to be in a place that was so very far away, his eyes occasionally looking into the distance to an imaginary horizon as he retreated within his own thoughts. "Mr. Daniels, I'm really very sorry to have to intrude on your grief like this, but I need to ask you some more questions about Megan's ex-boyfriend, the one who was here last week." He seemed to snap out of his stupor and turned his attention back to her. "Of course," he said. "What do you need to know?" Wherever in his head he had been, he was back now. "We're having trouble finding Mr. Stewart." "Oh." He sounded surprised, though not shocked. "What about his wife? Doesn't she know?" "She says she has no idea where he is. It seems they had a big fight. He's already left the marital home a week before he came round to see Megan." "What about work? He's a self-employed kitchen fitter, subcontracts for some of the big companies. He wouldn't just walk out on a job. He was between contracts." "Well, I don't know then. He's always been a bit unreliable. I'm not surprised Shelley kicked him out. Seems to spend all of his time drinking and playing computer games. He never really matured beyond his university days. Might have been all right to do that then, but he's got a kid now." Kat was well aware of the man's missing flaws, having read the the missing man's flaws, having read the notes from the interview with Shelley, his wife, who had finally grown sick of turning a blind eye to his lax ways and affinity for the bottle. She kicked him out of the family home with an ultimatum to shape up or ship out, and hadn't seen him since. How do you think Megan would have been with him? Was she sympathetic? God, no, she was always telling him to grow up. She still tried to be a good friend, supportive and all that, but she was definitely from the school of tough love. She told him before to go and get help, but he never listened. A look of alarm slowly crept across his face. "You all right, Mr. Daniels?" Kat said, having to stop herself from laying a reassuring hand on his arm. He turned to her wide-eyed. "You think he did it? That's why you're asking all these questions." "I'm not saying anything of the sort. We just need to speak to Mr. Stewart. He's one of the last people to have seen Megan alive. He may have information that could help us." Craig looked at her unblinking. She could see him thinking through what she'd said. But what if Megan went too far? What if he just flipped? That's why he's disappeared. He might have killed himself out of remorse. Oh my God, I bet that's what's happened. I just said it, didn't I? The bloke was unreliable and selfish and probably drunk. Kat set her hands out in front of her and slowly lowered them, a move intended to quiet the agitated man. "Calm down. Although we have to consider all of the possibilities, I don't think what you're suggesting is very likely. If he'd flipped, chances are he'd done something that night, not wait a week." Craig Daniels regarded her warily, but after a short spell he nodded. "I suppose. You can't think of anywhere else Mr. Stewart might be or how to contact him?" "No." "Well, if you do think of anything, you've got my details." Kat raised from her seat. "Of course." Back in her car, Kat put the key in the ignition, but instead of starting the engine, she sat deep in thought, pondering the significance of the ex-boyfriend's disappearance. She was still sitting motionless when a knock on the glass next to her head caused her to jump. She looked out to see Craig Daniels. He gave a small wave. She reached for the window switch. Well, I hope you enjoyed that short reading from A Confusion of Crows. It's the first in the DC Kat Mackenzie series. As I said, there are 2 others, and a 4th will be out next year. I also write short stories. I've currently got 2 anthologies of short stories called Crime Bites Volume 1 and Volume 2 out, available on Kindle only. If you're interested to find out more about me, then check out my website, susanhandley.co.uk. And thank you for listening and putting up with my fluffed lines. Thank you very much. Bye.